Good evening, everybody. I would like to introduce you to Nicola Rossi. I first met Nicola when she presented at one of our symposia at Goldsmiths, where she was then a master's student. She had done very well in our dystopian story competition, and she read her story that had done so well. It is now almost exactly 12 months since we staggered up Brick Lane on a night to the wonderful bookshop Libraria, where she launched the book. She's now launched the second part of the trilogy. The first one was called Rockstar Ending. The new one, which I'm delighted to say is just as good, Rock On, I read over Christmas, and that's really wonderful. So, Nicola, the floor's yours.
Thank you very much, Quentin. Right. So, hello everyone. So I'm Nicola Rossi, and I'm the author of the Rockstar Ending series of novels. So this evening, I'm going to talk about how winning an award from the Orwell Society inspired me to make a seismic career change. And I'm also going to talk a bit about how Orwell's life and works continue to inspire me today. So I've come to view, kind of looking back, 2017 as my year of Orwell. It's where it all began. But back then, I kept finding myself again and again walking in his footsteps. I was studying in London and frequently found myself wandering through Deptford. I stayed at a hotel in Paris. I became involved in a violent struggle in Barcelona, albeit with a mugger on a moped. And I ended up changing trains in Wigan, somewhere I had never been before in my life, in spite of growing up less than 20 miles away. To cap it all, I found myself in a hospital in the south of France, looking after someone who had been struck unexpectedly with appendicitis. For her, that was the worst thing in the world. And the number on the door to her ward was, of course, 101. You really couldn't make it up, could you? But most importantly for me, in 2017, I was inspired to start writing fiction again by the Orwell Society, whose student dystopian fiction competition gave me a new focus and boosted my confidence in my creative abilities. It all began one afternoon in the Professor Stuart Hall building at Goldsmiths University in London, where I was studying for a postgraduate qualification in digital media. I'd taken a 6-month sabbatical from a 30-year career in communications management, working for big technology companies. I'd actually discovered the degree course 5 years previously, and it took me that long to pluck up the courage to persuade my bosses to give me the 6 months leave I would need to really do justice to the course. The idea was that both they and I would benefit from me immersing myself in and thinking about the digital world. And I was determined to make the most of my first career break, unless you count maternity leave. And those of you who've been on maternity leave will know that that really isn't a career break at all. So one morning, sitting in the coffee bar between lectures, I looked up from my Foucault, very fashionable at the moment, and caught a glimpse of one of the ubiquitous information screens. Instead of Big Brother looking down on me, however, I saw George Orwell's kindly face next to a strip of copy inviting entries for the competition. I knew instantly what I wanted to write about, something that had been on my mind for many years, but for which I had never found an outlet. So in the footsteps of Orwell, I was going to try to make political writing into an art. And little did I know, One Last Gift, the short story I entered, was to become the basis for my debut novel Rockstar Ending, which was published on the 1st of January 2020. And when I heard I'd been given an award for the story, I was overcome with emotion. And my subconscious was definitely trying to tell me something. And that was the moment when it first began to dawn on me that I had a deep yearning to do something different, essentially to live a more creative life. A year later, I had left my job and set out on a journey to explore what that more creative life might look like. So in March 2018, I flew to Austin, Texas for the South by Southwest Festival, where I queued for hours to hear all manner of inspiring presentations from creative and technological giants as diverse as Elon Musk, Spike Lee, and the team behind the Westworld series. And if you're interested in what that was like, I've made a short series of films about my experiences there, which you can see on YouTube, but don't look for them now. I've asked Neil if he can send out various links at the end, and we'll include those in there if you're interested. When I got back from the States, I went on a residential writing course with the Arvon Foundation, and I went along clutching my award-winning short story. And when I was working out what to say today, I remembered that one of the tutors used extracts from 1984 to get me and my fellow students thinking about the best way for a book to start and for a book to end. And by the time I went home, I had 5 chapters written, and I'd been given the strong message from my fellow students and tutors that I must write the book. And people often say this, I must write the book before it's too late. And I'll come back to that point later. So a few weeks later, as Quentin said, I was invited to speak at the Orwell and the Arts Symposium at Goldsmiths. And I read from my work and I was given a warm welcome. And after that, I was invited to submit an article for the Journal of Orwell Studies. And one of my treasured possessions, I've got it here, which included an extract of my work. And I think each of these incremental opportunities left me feeling that little bit more confident about my writing ability, more certain that I had to write the book, and perhaps most importantly, that there might actually be an audience for what I had to say. So I got down to it. And by the end of the summer, I had a completed manuscript and began the process of querying. And for those of you who aren't involved in writing and publishing, that's the technical term for approaching agents and publishers to see if they wanted to work with me. So I had another dose of encouraging feedback and several full manuscript requests, which is always very exciting. And around that time, I also began networking with other authors and going to literary events and listening to panels where agents and publishers and writers talked about their experiences and expectations. And my overriding impression was one of quite a fickle industry, overwhelmed with submissions. I mean, people with thousands of submissions in their inboxes, where subjectivity was the norm and everything seemed to take forever. And if I got a deal, it would only be the start of it, and it would take a long time to get the book out. And whether a publisher decides to place you subsequently among the handful of writers on their books that they want to promote heavily is another huge gamble. So I was haunted by this thing that a few people said to me, which is you must write the book before it's too late. And I was anxious to get my ideas out there quickly. So I began to look into self-publishing. Now, the biggest downside of taking that route is low status. And that's actually improving with the likes of Andy Weir, who wrote The Martian, starting out by publishing his own work. There are a lot of very successful self-published authors, and there are many advantages. For me, primarily, it was that after 30 years of conforming to corporate life, there was this huge appeal in having complete creative control. So appointing my own editors and cover designers, and not having to compromise. So by the time an offer arrived, I'd almost forgotten I'd even approached that particular publisher, and I got very excited about going down the self-publishing route. My heart was with the rebels, and I decided that was what I would do. So the people who have read my books are leaving excellent reviews. I've had some reviews alongside conventionally published writers in magazines like The Idler, and perhaps a little more out there, The Fortean Times. But I really feel like I'm making a lot of progress, and my challenge once book 3 is finished will be to put more heat under the sales and marketing. You know, now I'm building my reputation, and I'm happy to be gradually growing a loyal cohort of readers, some of whom have contacted me from all over the world to say how much they like the books and to share details of their lives with me. And that's an enormous privilege that I had never dreamed of when I started to think about becoming a writer. So that's been really super. But through all this, I've been mindful of Orwell's life, as like me, he began to focus on dystopian fiction after a long and established career doing a number of different things. And in his case, you know, most well known now as a journalist and essayist. For me, it was having a life and an identity as a corporate communications leader whose writing had to conform to a rigorous set of rules and never express a contentious political opinion. And I've also come to recognise that writing long-form dystopian fiction requires resilience. We dystopian writers have to inhabit an imaginary world with some very dark corners. Orwell has described that struggle, the emotional struggle involved in the writing process. A lot of writers talk about that. But to find light and humour in those dystopian dark corners and build an entertaining story around that, you know, takes perseverance and imagination and judgment and courage. Because dystopia is a genre that takes our readers into uncomfortable places. Room 101, yeah. And it can be a hard sell. And frustrating though that can be, I'm working on the assumption that conventional success for my work is possible, but is not going to happen overnight. And I've taken huge comfort from the tribulations George Orwell faced in trying to find a publisher for Animal Farm in 1984. The T.S. Eliot Faber and Faber rejection letter, which is available online if anyone hasn't read it, you just do a search and it comes up in an archive. That letter was music to my ears when I first heard it read aloud on an Orwell Society walk around Bloomsbury, which I attended in the middle of the period when I was corresponding with agents. And at the time I had on my mind one specific agent who loved many aspects of the book, but she said she couldn't take it on because of the depiction of millennials. You know, and they're not wholly bad, but you know, they're not wholly good either. And she said to me in an email, "I'm one of them. This is too hard for me." So if you're dealing with controversial and emotionally laden material, it will never be an easy ride for everybody. And I also need to say something here about the themes in my work that have been influenced by Orwell and his wider cultural legacy. When I was at Goldsmiths studying for my MA, I became very interested in the technological imaginary. David Bowie's album Diamond Dogs and Terry Gilliam's film Brazil are just two examples that owe a huge debt of creative gratitude to George Orwell. Works such as those continue to provide me with inspiration even today. And their imaginary worlds are allegorical. They overlap with contemporary social, political, and economic factors. And it's that overlap that makes a work of fiction into something which might, and you know, I'm always embarrassed to use this phrase, but there's no getting away from it, that might make a story into something that could change the world. And Bernardine Evaristo, the author of Girl, Woman, Other, which won the 2019 Booker Prize, recently said on BBC Radio that fiction touches people on a very deep level. And she's absolutely right. And at the heart of my writing, which above all I want to entertain people as well as making them think, is the idea that everyone can make the world a better place. Lexi, my heroine, is very much an ordinary person, but against a frightening technological background, she does some extraordinary things which significantly change the course of other people's lives. So if you're interested in any non-fiction that explores these blurred lines between surveillance and manipulation, I would recommend having a look at a film called The Great Hack on Netflix, or Shoshana Zuboff's book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. They're both a great place to start, but not compulsory reading. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Orwell's legacy for me is his mortality. That he never lived to see his success, to see his name become an adjective, is just so terribly sad. And it's one of the reasons I feel driven to get my stories out there before it's too late. And that phrase has taken on a more sinister nuance in the context of the global pandemic. Fundamentally, I want my books to be enjoyed by as many people as possible, but preferably while I'm still alive. And COVID-19 has hardened my resolution to get a move on with books 2 and 3, because posthumous success would be a bittersweet second prize. So on that cheery note, I'm going to crack on and read you a very short extract from Rock On, which came out in November, the second book in the series. And I've had to choose this passage quite carefully so as not to give any spoilers for the first book. So this scene is from the first chapter of Rock On. It's a meeting taking place at Brightly, the marketing agency which has come up with the hugely successful Rockstar Ending campaign. The conversation is among the people who work for the agency that's promoting voluntary euthanasia as an aspirational lifestyle choice. Here we go. Lars looked directly into the camera. The dash is all up to date, end December. It's been a record month, even taking the Christmas Day shutdown into account. By the way, they don't need to do that, you know. We should make a feature of it in future. There's so much scope for a seasonal promotion integrated with the Christmas playlists, people dreading being cooped up with their families and so on. We can put a whole new spin on the most wonderful time of the year. Quite, Lars, Stella said blankly. But for now, can you stick to the performance report? Mason will want data, data, data. Sharing my screen now, Lars said with a hint of disappointment. His face faded out and was replaced by a colourful animated slide, mapping advertising spend across 5 social media platforms, clicks, sell-throughs, bookings, fulfillment, and finally to after-sales. The Rockstar Ending logo was at the top of the screen. Tell me, Sonny, is this any good? Stella asked, turning away from the screen for a moment. We've nothing to compare it to, you know. It's one of a kind. Well, I can't tell Mason that. Stella hated it when these kids with data science degrees tried to be clever. She'd already been in the meeting long enough to get restless. Sonny nodded resolutely. He knew how to deliver what Stella wanted. Okay. Well, if you want to compare it to other campaigns targeted at the, let's say, over 70s, which is the primary group, then yes, it's doing exceptionally well, especially on click to purchase. The post-fulfillment memorial package has surprised all of us, with a lot of the families responding well to the memorabilia offer. It's rather vulgar. Stella's mouth pursed into a flicker of disgust. It's not meant to be high art. The little statuettes, cast from loved ones' ashes, are being bought by 29% of relatives. Even the snow globes have made a few sales. No accounting for taste. Is the snow made from? Everyone asked Sunny that question. The ashes? No. They would be the wrong colour and consistency, only the effigy. They are excellent, low-cost, high-margin, incremental sales, Lars flashed back onto the screen. The confidential nature of the ending service creates a period of surprise and inertia for those left behind. They're in the prime state for an impulse purchase, nursing an emotional void that needs to be filled. The memorial package had been Portia's idea, so she thought she should say something. We studied the folk art of various cultures and religions when we designed the merchandise. When we match it with the security camera and smart TV footage from inside people's homes, it's very easy to target the promo, so it's consistent with the decorative touches they already have. Her range had been influenced by the Catholic ephemera that filled her elderly neighbour's house in Liverpool. Bernie's place was cluttered with glow-in-the-dark religious statues and flimsy plastic bottles in the shape of Our Lady of Lourdes, containing holy water so old that it had become a biohazard. Okay, I'm convinced. That's enough. Right, send me the dashboard, Lars, now. How are plans coming along for phase 2? So I'm going to leave it there. A couple of things before we go to questions. First, I want to say how grateful I am for the continued support of the Orwell Society, the Richards, Quentin, Liz, Neil. You have helped me a lot, but you also provide a brilliant programme of events, even in lockdown, although I really can't wait till we're all allowed out again. And I have links to all sorts of things, the Spotify playlists that accompany each book in the series, my website, recording of me reading from Rockstar Ending, the first chapter of which is based on the short story. So I think Neil will post those out at the end rather than put them on the slide. So yeah, so any questions?
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I have, and I hope you've seen that Nicola manages to inject into some very serious subject matter. Euthanasia can't get much more serious than that. Some gentle jibes and humour, and the points that she makes are better able to be received because of that. One of the things you'll find if you've not read her books is she's brilliant with clever acronyms. And I'll leave it there. Who would like to ask the first question? Don't be shy. Ah, Les. Les, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, please. Thank you, Nicola. I think we've also put a couple of short articles by you on the website. Early responses to being taught George Orwell at school or dystopia at school. But what I'd like to ask you is, you've mentioned Bernard Evaristo, and since she published her novel, or Kate Clanchy has published her collection of poetry, figures who are not political have started to comment or be quoted in the newspapers and online on current affairs. Do you think that your work has given you any ability to comment on current affairs in the way that those people have been brought out?
Yeah, I mean, I have actually. It didn't get anywhere, but I did pitch a piece to the Guardian when there's a lot of talk about changes in the laws around euthanasia, and I dropped a line to them. So I kind of have a bit of a view on that, which is a sort of worried about the slippery slope, kind of in a nutshell, but more informed views in that, looking at some things that have happened in kind of recent history. So yes, I do think artists are talking more about politics, but inevitably, you know, Bernadine's book is about, you know, race, which is hugely political, and it's appropriate that our voices are added to those of perhaps academics and politicians. You know, in fact, when I was, gosh, I'm amazed. When I was 17, I lived in the Northwest, and there was a program called Granada Reports, which was like, that's a local news program, and it's quite famous because if anyone, I don't know, there's a lot of music in my books, and there was a man called Anthony Wilson who became famous in the music industry, but he also presented on Granada Reports. Anyway, one night they said they were thinking of having a discussion program in the studio, a sort of pre-Jeremy Kyle kind of members of the public thing, and I kind of wrote in and ended up being brought into the studio to talk about a subject which I found really dull, but you know, it was, should children be smacked or not? So I've always been interested in engaging in kind of public debate around different subjects. So I don't see why artists, you know, members of the public's views are forever used in the media now. So does that answer your question, Les?
I think it helps. I mean, I'm trying to remember the name of the American author of We Need to Talk About Kevin, who is now regularly on TV. But
Lionel Shriver.
Lionel Shriver, except
Yeah.
that her political position now seems to be moving further and further right,
Yeah.
rather than being simply contentious.
Yeah, I have to say I loved that book, but I can't agree with a lot of the stuff she says now. You know, there are so many. I mean, we're surrounded by kind of iconic artistic figures, you know, who can quite easily move away from the place where you first liked them, and suddenly you're in a whole realm of stuff that you really don't agree with. And also, I think with the environment around Twitter, it's really you know, it doesn't take long for things to escalate. I'm very careful in those kind of places. I don't want to get into a massive emotional argument with anyone. I just want to help people think about different issues. I think, I mean, there comes a time when you do have to stand up, doesn't there? But yeah.
Quentin, do you have other questioners or okay, I'll drop out at this point then. I do have another question, but I ought to let everybody else have their turn. Thank you very much, Nicola.
Okay.
If you use the hand up thing, I can spot you more easily.
I don't have the hand up thing at the bottom of my screen.
Peter, please.
It's click on the reactions button and then click on the hand.
Oh, I see. Well, can I? Or
The floor's yours, Peter.
Yes, I'm curious if you might say more. It seems to me that the difficulty with self-publishing is getting the book known. You know, obviously, even though we're all disappointed about how much the publisher does for one's book, but nevertheless, obviously, the publisher has a system, does try and do something, we hope. But if one self-publishes, it's much more of a difficulty. How did you go about making your book known via self-publishing?
Well, you have to do a certain amount of advertising. So I'm learning the Amazon advertising business and also Facebook advertising, which seems to be the way to break. I haven't done any Facebook advertising yet, so I'm learning that. Also, trying to get it reviewed. So I have had some success in getting it reviewed in some publications. And just kind of keeping on with it and having basic things like a website, like building a newsletter. I do promotions on specialist science fiction book promotions, things like BookBub or Book Barbarian, which are places that people who are really avid readers go to find out about books, and those are reasonably successful, but they're not scaling massively. I think it's going to be a long road. But I've spoken to so many conventionally published authors, even some who have had big advances, who have found that, you know, that the person who liked them at the publishing house left, and there was no weight put behind what they were doing. So it's tough. It's tough, and I'm not always sure I've done the right thing, but I'm going to make the best of it. And it does at least mean that the book is out now, and the first book wouldn't even be out yet if I'd gone with Unbound, who I had my offer from.
Claire, would you like to ask a question? Or are you just getting yourself comfortable? Dione, please. You're mute. You need to unmute, Dione.
There.
Yeah, there we are.
Good.
Far away.
Well, it made me think of something quite amusing, and that is that the Orwell Society came into being because I self-published a book and advertised it online. I started a little website, and people like Peter Stansky answered my call for attention, and they said, why isn't there an Orwell Society? And several years later, there is one. That's it.
Yeah, and I think there are, you know, because there are global platforms where, you know, I know my book's available all over the world. I know not everyone loves Amazon, but there are other platforms as well, which I mean, it's a technical thing, but I also publish through an organization called Ingram Spark, who sell print books wholesale through the big print wholesalers globally. So bookshops that don't want to deal with Amazon, and individuals who don't want to deal with Amazon don't have to. So, you know, there is a distribution mechanism there, but it's getting the cut through for people to know that the book's there in the first place. That's the biggest challenge.
Richard Keeble, please. Where are you?
I
There.
apologise. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Richard.
We can hear you.
My camera's not working, so I apologise.
Not at all. We know.
I was really delighted to carry your story in that issue of George Orwell's Studies, which you kindly displayed. And every time I read it, I have a wide smile on my face, because as Quentin rightly stressed, your writing is very funny, and it's very difficult to write funny. I don't know if you know Evelyn Waugh's story, Love Among the Ruins. He wrote it as a tribute to Orwell. He wrote it a few years after he died. And it's one of my favorite dystopian novellas, really. One reason being that it's pleasantly short. Like your writing, it's also very funny. It's laugh out aloud humor, but typically Evelyn Waugh, it's politically very much to the right, and it's making fun of the socialist government. But in that, there is, at the core of it, a joke about euthanasia as well. The central character, Miles Plastic, actually becomes a worker for the euthanasia department, which is described as the only expanding department in the state. And there's a lot of humor around that idea in the novel. So I do recommend it. I was wondering where your rather unusual idea about voluntary euthanasia and the humor around it, where did that actually come from?
I don't know. I think some of it was listening, you know, to people saying, you know, when they're looking at their own old members of their family kind of in pain or suffering, you know, people saying in a kind of offhand way, oh, I'm off to Dignitas, you know, I'm not going to do that, or I've already written, and people do say that. you know,
Yeah.
and it's a pretty serious thing to say.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of haunted me a bit, you know.
Our eldest daughter says she's saving up for a Dignitas fund for us.
Yeah, well, here's another lovely thing you can watch on YouTube. I mean, as part of the research for this, I had a look at some of the Dignitas videos, and, you know, oh, good Lord, they just make it look all so civilized, and, you know, it's, I mean, I found it quite breathtaking, but not that I would, oh, anyway, too complicated an issue to go into in any great detail here, but it can be presented really quite, you know, as something very compassionate, and in some circumstances it probably is, but the problem is, how do you know which circumstances?
Mm,
You know.
Thank
exactly.
you.
But Richard, thank you very much for that recommendation of that story. I hadn't read that. I love Vile Bodies. That's the only Evelyn Waugh I remember in any great detail. So I'll definitely have a look at that. Thank
If you
you.
get The Penguin, The Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold, it's
Okay.
at the end of that.
Okay.
They'll run together. And of course, The Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold is one of the most remarkable stories ever written, because in that, Waugh actually gets a story out of describing his own nervous breakdown, which is an amazing thing to think. But that's what that story is built around.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, if you've not read that much Waugh, Nicola, can I recommend as another author who has a wicked sense of humour while making some quite serious points as well. Who would like to ask a question? Brian, the floor's yours.
Hiya. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Great.
Hello, Brian.
Thank you for that. Hiya. I was just going to ask you a sort of general question about the relationship between sort of gender and dystopia. You know, most of the dystopian novels I'm familiar with are written by men. I just wonder, you know, any thoughts about how that might have influenced and related to your own writing? Do you think there is a different slant that can be put onto it, that perhaps, you know, gender should come into it as well when we're thinking about how the future is depicted?
Well, I think the most frightening book I have ever read is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. Not from, although the things that happen to women in that are utterly dreadful, for me the most frightening moment in that book, well, the most frightening series of events, is when the central character, her cash point card stops working and she's disempowered in a way that she doesn't see it coming, you know. So and also, I don't know if you've come across Hilary St. John Mantel's Station 11, which has been written recently. Another fantastic, it's a post-apocalyptic dystopian book. But I don't know whether it's because I'm an only child and I never really thought about my gender particularly until I kind of get my, that it didn't. So no, I don't think it has been an issue for me, and I really love Margaret Atwood. But is there something behind that point, Brian? Is there
No, not
to explore?
you know, I was just curious really, but because I'm just, as I say, familiar. Obviously, there's Herland, and there are other examples of dystopian fiction written by women. But I just wondered about how they how that might change the way in which you depict the future, and what sorts of relationships are important, or whether technology is presented in the same type of way. It was just a thought, really.
No, I think the technology point is very interesting, because you know, the book, my cover designer Tim read it and he said, well, it's like cyberpunk, and I can't think of many women who write cyberpunk, or middle-aged female heroines, or even middle-aged female people who appear in cyberpunk. So there is something about my work which it doesn't conform particularly easily to a genre. You know, some of the, I mean, it has technology, and it has, you know, a world in which is in the near future in which things happen, but it's very much character driven. And there are some older people in there who do some brave things, and you don't get that a lot in many other books in that kind of genre or adjacent genres, particularly.
Thank you.
Alex Brooke, would you like to ask your question, Alex? Where are you?
Yeah, can you?
I heard you then, Alex.
Unmute yourself, Alex, please.
Alex, you're still on mute.
You're still on mute, Alex. Oh.
Right.
That's it.
Can you hear me now?
Got it. Yeah.
You know, Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just wondering if you sometimes model yourself, or you sometimes imagine that you're a female version of George Orwell when you're writing.
I don't think so, because my background and his are just so completely different. Only in that I'm trying to do something to make people think about unintended consequences in a political environment. But I really, yeah.
Rick, unmute yourself, please.
There we go. Right, Nicola, you can hear me, can you?
I can hear you, Richard, yeah.
Yes, on a lighter note, actually, I had to slightly smile about the last one. I think you're slightly more attractive than my father, but that's by the by.
I don't smoke as much.
No, well, I hope not. On a lighter note, in my father, in midlife, of course, he was only in his 30s, 40s, said that he thought he probably only had another 4 books in him. I'm hoping, sincerely, that you have more than that left in your life. I'm not asking you to comment one way or the other unless you wish so to do.
Oh, I'm happy to. I'm happy to, Richard. So, book 3, Rockaway, will be the 3rd book in the series. I'm not sure whether I will leave it at the end of the trilogy or whether I will come back to it. And I'm thinking about also doing some non-fiction as well. So I will continue to write, but my husband's on the call and I've promised him that we're going to go traveling. So I need to be really careful what I commit to.
Quite right.
Well,
nicely said.
Simon won't be the only person wishing we could all go travelling.
Yeah. Well, luckily there's something preventing us doing that at the moment, so I've got a chance of getting book 3 done.
The next question. Would you like to ask your next question, Les?
Thank you. Actually, a third question has occurred to me since I spoke. But the question I was going to ask is, do you see your work within dystopia as filling in a space between other dystopiae? Or do you think you overlap in some ways and it's more your presentation of the idea rather than the idea itself?
Do you know what? One never has read enough to know whether one overlaps. I think it is a bit different. I think it's probably funnier than most of the dystopias I've read. I'm not sure who it overlaps with. I mean, there are kind of narrative devices like the acronyms, for example, that I've been very heavily influenced by Thomas Pynchon on that front, and he's not a pure dystopian writer by any stretch of the imagination. But but I'm not sure. And I really love William Gibson's work, and the way he works in the near future, I think is fantastic. But the thing he misses, because he conforms to the cyberpunk trope, there are not really many older people in there. And one of the things I really like about my books is that I have older people doing extraordinary things, you know, rather than being marginalized or yeah. So I think the use of giving older people agency, and in book 2, and there will be in 3, people with disabilities some agency, you know, without doing it to tick a box, but because they're really interesting characters, then I think that's a bit different. I think that sets it apart from quite a lot of writing, not just necessarily dystopia.
Ravinder, and next, it's a pleasure to welcome you. I think it's the first time we've had the opportunity to have a question from you.
Yeah, it is my very first question, so yeah, I remember it. But yeah, thank you for sharing your time. So I've got a question more about your writing style. So you mentioned how obviously corporate writing is quite structured and it has to fit within a framework. So is there anything that you did kind of break out of that structure in terms of when your writing habits that you incorporated to help you write a novel, just to get out of that very kind of tight corporate structure of writing?
Okay. So having the corporate background is, so a useful thing from that is that I'm very organized, and funnily enough, when I was doing my postgraduate degree, one of my friends said to me, you should do a PhD because you've got the right work ethic. So, but I don't think you don't have to be a corporate person to have a good work ethic, and actually companies are full of people who haven't. So, but maybe that's more of a personal characteristic that helped me achieve a certain amount of success in that world. Going on the Arvon course definitely helped. So they've been teaching creative writing for decades, and kind of talking to other successful writers who I really admire was a huge help on that course, because I'd been telling people to do Arvon courses forever, because a few of my friends told me to go on it, but I'd never been on one. And then I was looking at their website one day because I was going to recommend it to someone else, and I saw that 2 writers whose work I had binged, so I'd read one of their books and then bought everything else that they'd written, and always looked for them bringing out new stuff, were teaching there. So that was really helpful, because I didn't really know how to approach writing a novel, although it kind of flowed. And so another thing that I've done is I've worked with developmental editors who have really helped me think about constructing character arcs and making sure that there are no loose ends, and, you know, spotted gaps in the story. I mean, that kind of collaboration, which someone who's conventionally published would get from their agent typically these days, has been amazing. So you do have to find some people that you really trust to read, and whose opinion you respect, either because you know their work, or they come recommended by someone, or, you know, to really help you make sure that you shape the book in the right way. So finding the right people to work with, I would say, has been enormously helpful. And in terms of, I mean, the whole writing routine thing, I mean, I know writers who always get up at 6 in the morning, write for 3 hours, go for a run, do their marketing in the afternoon or whatever else. I find it quite hard to juggle all of those things. So especially with the marketing. So I used to do a weekly newsletter. I've turned that down now to every 2 weeks, just to give me the space to focus on writing book 3. And, you know, for me, it's an immersive process, and sometimes you just have to keep going when the mood takes you. And I think what's fascinating is that in corporate life, you know someone wants you to talk about, I don't know, the Internet of Things, and you know what the corporate branding is. So you have a playbook, if you like, But writing fiction, you have a blank page and you can do whatever you want with it. And that is just tremendously liberating. And people talk about being afraid of the blank page, but actually, you know, what is extraordinary is how the ideas and the characters take form from somewhere deep in your subconscious, and there you have it. You know, it's marvelous.
Well, I think that's
Thank you.
I think that's a very wonderful place to start drawing things to a close. Could I remind everybody that on the 21st of February, Richard Blair will be talking about his life on Jura with his father. Those of us who've been on the Jura trip will have heard some of this, but I'm sure that he's going to introduce some things that will surprise us all. There are 3 talks this year, of which this is the first one, and Sylvia Tops is the second one, where we're encouraging you to invite any friends that you think might be interested in Orwell and possibly joining the society to be our guests on the night. And that's the first occasion we're going to do that. So if you know people who you think are interested in Orwell, please encourage them. And I know that includes some of Nicola's friends who are with us tonight, who I should have given a more personal welcome to earlier. It's been lovely to see you with us, and I'm sure you've enjoyed it as much as everybody else has. So if everybody would like to unmute themselves, please can we say thank you to Nicola in the time-honoured fashion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this evening.